We'd be honored to host Governor Brian Kemp tossing Georgia's name into the ring if the Republican National Convention moves. President Trump says he wants to have a crowd of thousands, but he's waiting on an answer from North Carolina's governor. Nick Sturdivant live in Midtown with what it would take to move the convention.
Good morning, Sheba. We have a poll on our website up right now. Should Georgia host the RNC? Yes or no? Go ahead and vote on our website, 11alive.com. Kemp tweeting his invitation to President Donald Trump yesterday. Kemp writing, with world-class facilities, restaurants, hotels, and workforce, Georgia would be honored to safely host the Republican National Convention. We hope you will consider the Peach State. Charlotte was named as the host, and North Carolina has been preparing for 2 years. North Carolina's Governor Roy Cooper says he wants to work with the RNC to hold the convention in Charlotte, but not without a well-thought-out and safe plan. The RNC is set to happen in late August, but medical experts say under current conditions, it would be too risky to pack 20,000 people into an area for the convention.
I would think they would have to have definitely not every seat filled. I think you'd have to have that separation. I think you'd have to have people wearing masks. We're applying the rules as they are today, so it's hard to know what's going to happen later in the summer.
And Sheba, Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottom said in the statement, like North Carolina, the city of Atlanta is following a phased, data-driven approach to reopening. The plan does not contemplate hosting a large gathering event in August.
And so far, the majority of you are saying no, Georgia should not host the RNC.